When producing art, where does inspiration come from? In the words of American writer Amy Tan, perhaps it arises from desperation or from the kindness of the muses. For our next guests, one found inspiration from her personal experiences with Hurricane Katrina, while the other one turned his focus to religion and everyday objects.
The Katrina pieces were a personal response to that tragedy. My mom had 10 feet of water in her house for 3 weeks and lost everything. And I went last November to help her sort through some of that. And when I left there, I felt like there was just, again, a personal response. Because I work dealing with the human figure, I had been thinking about a series of faces that were showing particular emotions. And I kind of played around with that and tried to do some self-portraits. So I took a bunch of digital photos, and then from that developed the drawings, which the prints are actually, an easy way of describing them are prints of those drawings. And then the paintings, again, came out of those drawings. I try to, in that particular, those works, to try and maybe make it a little bit more of, you know, kind of a universal dealing in general with those kinds of feelings, so that somebody that hasn't experienced anything like any kind of tragedy, whether it's Katrina or some other natural or otherwise catastrophe, could still relate to those just from their own personal experience. So this for me was, it was a little bit almost a raw type of thing, where it was just an immediate or response as opposed to kind of sitting and filtering it through. But I wanted that with the Katrina series. I like what you got going on there. Are you going to be using that? This is coming along really nicely. At UCF, I teach 2D design and Drawing 1 this semester. And 2D design is basically dealing with the elements and principles of two-dimensional work. I also deal with color theory, and as a painter, those are that's kind of my bread and butter, if you will. It's called intermediates. The way I structure the class is I usually deal with color theory about a third of it, and then a third of it we look at the specific elements and principle of design, pattern, balance, texture, you know, all of those things. And then this last third, I have them do a series of what I call more completed, a little bit more sophisticated design projects using what they learned, hopefully, in the design and in the color theory. You have these
in a curve.
Oh, okay. What I try to get through to them in terms of just kind of a work ethic, if you will, is for them to sort of budget their time. I think what happens a lot in studio classes is that they think, well, I don't need to show up for class, and I try and emphasize that that class time is for them to be in there and to be working, and for me to help them should they have a problem.
The easiest thing would be to maybe make some black lines and connect this so that there is a connection.
I hope they leave the class with a sense that they have an understanding of, you know, design principles and a beginning of an understanding of color theory, and that making art doesn't necessarily mean you have to have one particular way of doing it, that there are many different ways of solving a problem. In our case, it's, you know, design principles, whether it's more non-representational or a little bit more representational, you know, and that what they're doing individually, you know, has value and has worth, and I hope they continue on.
Okay.
I enjoy what I'm doing, I enjoy teaching, and I enjoy making art, so that's why I'm here.
Nature Folded and Nature Unfolded, they're lithographs that have been cut up and folded into three-dimensional forms. Originally, they're drawn onto limestone and made so that they can be reproduced and reprinted in layers of color. Each of the prints is maybe 6 or 7 layers of color, printed individually, and after they're printed, they're made as individual flat works and also as raw material for making three-dimensional works as well. The box form relates to an idea, a metaphor of something that's contained, separated, or held together in a way that isolates it from everything else and allows you to notice it by itself. So Nature Unfolded and Nature Folded are all part of a larger group of work that tries to examine the mundane, the simpler things that we experience every day that we don't normally think of as being significant. I've been making prints for a long time, and my prints and drawings started originally as an interest in the figure and an interest in drawing and an interest in metaphor. And my work originally, at least when I was in school and when I was studying my undergrad degree, I was really interested in how the figure could communicate, especially with isolated gestures and also with text in the images. That took a turn in graduate school and became much more religious explicitly. And then again in graduate school, things turned again, and I became more and more interested in the object and how that could communicate very subtle ideas, but very powerful ideas of something that runs between the mundane and the sacred. I think the strongest piece is the piece with the red face here, but it's still kind of faded in through here, I think. In advanced printmaking class, there'll be students at various stages in their own development. And what I try to pursue with them is to use the media of printmaking and all that benefit that it has to try to stretch and challenge their own sense of who they are as an artist and how they can develop themselves more seriously. So they have them trying to develop more of a body of work that's cohesive, that's serious, and so they take themselves more seriously. Yeah, that's better. And it will get even better the third impression too. Printmaking has a really strong connection to drawing, and most people who are drawn to prints, I find, are first drawn to drawing and then drawn to prints. And I try to exploit that as best I can to allow them to use all the beautiful marks they can make and all the subtleties of line or value within their work in printmaking and allow them to achieve that as best they can. Who do you think is the strongest work here? Or something about it that you feel like is her strength as an artist? I think one has to trust oneself as an artist before you trust anyone else. You have to see and believe in yourself. You have to believe that you can make something better than you thought you could. And you have to be able to challenge yourself to make that work. So I try to give them that inspiration by believing in them, believing in their work, even when I can see that they're apprehensive about it themselves. So I try to listen to what they have to say about the work, see what they're doing about the work, and challenge them to do it better, but believe in them every step of the way, even when they hit blocks. Well, most of the students taking prints probably won't be making prints after they finish school. But there's something about being creative in any media that people walk away from enriched, whether they take that as a career enrichment or as just a personal enrichment. There's something that being able to express themselves in this visual form and find some meaning in the images that they pursue, I think that's really important.
The camera obscura, daguerreotypes, tintypes, and cibachrome. These are old photography techniques that are seeing a resurgence in the works of contemporary photographers. A collection of these works entitled Out of Darkness was recently exhibited here at the University of Central Florida's Art Gallery.
I look at the art that you see here in this gallery, and I don't see it in terms so much of photography's past, but rather how it fits in with what's going on in contemporary art and the direction that a lot of contemporary art is taking.
This show is a really terrific way to think about the basics, to think about what it is that makes a photograph, and what it is that makes a camera, what it is that photography is all about. Out of Darkness is an exhibition of photographs that are made in older photographic, technological, and methodological styles. And the exhibition is an attempt to sum up the kinds of ways that photographers and conceptual artists have been using old photographic processes. For example, the pinhole camera, older cameras with soft focus lenses, the camera obscura, which is where a room is made into a camera by means of putting a hole in a wall and allowing the world from outside to come in through the hole and cast an image on the opposite wall. So there are many techniques that are just as important in the history of photography that are also considered part of that practice.
In a certain sense, the daguerreotype is the most archival form of photography. The Cibachrome is an extremely archival process, but color photography from day one always had the reputation for being a fugitive process, that the color would fade over time. But here, this earliest process, the daguerreotype, is virtually impermeable. And in fact, when you display daguerreotypes, the easiest way to display them is really to just blast them with light, something that you can't do with any other type of photography.
You know, these days with the digital camera, anybody can hold a camera up and make a picture incredibly quickly, and then, more importantly, see it immediately. But in fact, photography is really more about the history of struggle. And the earliest photographic processes were dangerous because of the types of chemistry that were used. They're arduous, and they were slow. It took a long time to make a photographic image. The equipment was large. The light sensitivity of the photographic emulsion was very slow. It takes a lot of skill to make a daguerreotype or a tintype or a camera obscura image. Out of Darkness, it's all really about experimentation, not restricting yourself to the current most commercially viable form of photographic technology, but rather reaching back into the past and using the whole thing as a kind of a smorgasbord of options where you can make a photograph look any way you want. I think that it's clear that at this moment, digital is usurping a lot of what photography has done for the world in the past. And in a way, in a very strange way, the future of photography as an art form may be poised on the brink of a moment of great promise, a moment when something new will happen and we have no idea what it will be. But I think that before that has to happen, this is what happens first. People going back to the origins, people thinking again about what the possibilities are that lie latent in the materials and the processes and the practices that make up the history of the medium.
.2D design, printmaking, and photography are but a few of the interesting topics in the arts that will be covered on the gallery. We will also be bringing you the latest in-depth stories in music, dance, theater, and film within the University of Central Florida's community. I'm Bea Boyd. We'll see you next time.